the ultimate AI coding guide for engineers who are building real-world production apps for thousands of users. In this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through everything from setting up Claude Code, my extensive AI coding rules file, how I actually use this file to code each part of the process, and I'm going to walk through a real example implementing a feature in my codebase, which is an existing codebase with many users that I support. This video is for software engineers who want to learn best practices using AI for everyday coding. This is not vibe coding. This is not building MVPs. And real quick, my name's Sabrina Ramonov. My background's in computer science and physics from UC Berkeley, and I previously sold an AI company for millions of dollars. The first step is to download your AI coding tool. Many of you probably use Cursor AI or Windsurf AI. I did too for a very long time. In fact, I built the MVP of my product entirely with Cursor AI back in early September. But nowadays, I've switched to Claude Code. I found it to be much more powerful than both Cursor and Windsurf. Super easy to install. Just do npm install here, okay? Then open a terminal and run Claude. Or if you use Visual Studio Code, you can download their extension and they have instructions on the website. There'll be a little Claude icon here, okay? And then it'll run Claude. The nice thing about the extension is that it is aware of what files you have open in your IDE. If you type /IDE, connect to an IDE for integrated development features run, okay? The other thing I'll point out is choosing the model. I actually prefer Opus for everything as much as possible. So Opus. And then if you do like Vim mode, you can toggle between Vim or normal mode. Before we start coding, I'm going to walk you through my AI coding rules file. In Claude Code, it's called Claude.md. In Cursor AI, it's called Cursor Rules. It starts off with implementation best practices. The purpose of these rules is to ensure maintainability, safety, and developer velocity. Before coding, ask me clarifying questions, draft and confirm an approach. If multiple good approaches exist, list the pros and cons. While coding, we're going to follow test-driven development, okay? Name functions with your existing domain vocabulary for consistency, really important if you have a large code base. Introduce classes when small testable functions suffice. Prefer simple composable testable functions. If you're using TypeScript, prefer branded types for your IDs, etc., etc. Rely on self-explanatory code. Don't just litter the code base with comments everywhere. Default to type, not interface. And this is important for refactoring. Don't extract a new function unless it will be reused elsewhere, or it's the only way to unit test, otherwise untestable logic, or drastically improve readability. Because I notice oftentimes when I tell AI to refactor something or come up with a better plan, it'll extract all of these functions, but it's not really refactoring unless it hits some of these criteria. By the way, I should have mentioned this earlier. You might notice like the tags here, must, should not, BP1, BP2, BP3. This is really handy because when Claude goes over and checks your code base, it can point out like, oh, this code change fails rule C3. It introduced a class instead of using a small testable function. Or this code change failed rule C6. It used import type for something else. So I find this really handy, and the codes are organized by section. So like C1, C2 is related to coding, T1, T2 related to testing. So here's testing. Co-locate unit tests in the same directory as source file. For any API change, add or extend integration tests over here. Always separate pure logic unit tests from database touching integration tests, etc. Database, I mean, for the database section, you'll probably want to update this so that it's customized to your repo, similar to code organization and tooling gates. And then I have a little section down here for Git as well. Use conventional commits format when writing messages. Obviously, you're going to want to tweak this so that it makes sense for your code base, and Claude Code can help you. So if you copy this file, import it into your project, and then ask Claude Code, how should I update this Claude.md so that it is specifically tailored to my code base? That should mostly do the trick. Okay, so this first part is just implementation best practices, and every time I start something new with Claude Code, I clear the context and then tell it to read and analyze these implementation best practices. And I'll show you all of that in a sec. Right now, I'm just walking through this really long file. Okay, so the next section is writing functions best practices. So when I ask Claude, like, look at the function you implemented, is it good or not? It's supposed to use this checklist. I'm not going to read it step by step. You can read it, but basically it's best practices for writing functions. Here's writing test best practices, and you're going to see how I use these checklists in a bit, but it's pretty similar. Like for each test, you want to go through these best practices. Code organization, you'll want to customize this obviously according to your project. And then this section here is one of my favorites, remember shortcuts. And basically what it means is when I type QNew, for example, this means understand all of these best practices in this file, and your code should always follow these best practices. So I will run this shortcut QNew when I start a new session. I clear the context, type QNew. It forces Claude Code to read the Claude file, and so it has it kind of in immediate context. And then what I typically do is discuss the user story with Claude. And then when we come up with a decent plan, I tell it QPlan. And what that means is it looks at similar parts of the code base and determines whether the plan is pretty consistent with how I do things like everywhere else, introduces minimal changes, and reuses existing code. For example, if you can do the same thing with a function I've already implemented. When we're happy with the plan, so this is where I spend a lot of time kind of back and forth. When we're happy with the plan, then I type Qcode. That means implement your plan, ensuring the new tests pass, because test-driven development is really important. Always run these things, turbo, type check. These two you'll probably want to swap out, so it makes sense for your project. And when it's done coding, I have this other command, QCheck, which tells Claude, you are a skeptical senior software engineer. Perform this analysis for every major change you introduced. So now it's going to go through those checklists, the writing functions checklist, writing tests checklist, and the implementation best practices. And it's pretty cool because it's going to output what looks like a checklist. Like you'll see the things where it thinks it kind of went wrong according to the checklist. The problem with this, though, is like sometimes it's too much context, too many code changes, and then the checklists are pretty long as well. So I'll also break it down here. QCheckF. This will analyze each major function according to the checklist that I showed you earlier. This is QCheckTest, so it'll do the same thing, but for every major test I added. And honestly, I find that these work a lot better by focusing Claude on just functions or just tests rather than trying to do everything at once. Okay. Then once I'm happy with the quality of the code it's introduced and I'm testing it out, I have this command QUX. So Claude, imagine you're a human UX tester of this feature, output a list of scenarios you would test sorted by highest priority. And this is just nice for me so that I don't get too lazy with testing, you know, when you want to just like wrap up a feature. But this is really neat because Claude Code will like output a really long list, and there's always stuff there that I honestly probably wouldn't have tested myself unless Claude reminded me. And then the last thing here is just best practices for Git. QGit means add everything to staging, create a commit, and push to remote, and then use this best practices for writing your commit message. I'm basically using conventional commits format. This is sample structures for the commit message. This is literally copy pasted right from the conventional commits site. Okay, so that's pretty much the entire Claude.md file, and now we're going to put it into practice. So the first thing I'll do is make sure you branch out to your new branch feature /prompt-selection, and then clear the context, so type /clear, double check which model you're using is Opus. If you want Vim mode, type /vim, make sure it's connected to your IDE /IDE, right? Okay. And then I type QNew, it tells Claude to read the Claude file and understand all the best practices there. By the way, if you want to shift modes, you can do Shift Tab. This will auto accept all edits. This is plan mode, and this is normal mode. I usually will keep it in normal mode or accept all edits mode. Okay, so now Claude reviewed our Claude.md file. Great, awesome. And then I will say, create a plan for this user story. You are improving the remix screen. Okay. And you can actually drop screenshots, by the way. So here, I'm going to take a screenshot of this screen and then drop it into my Claude.md file. And basically what we want to do is, this is my app running locally, by the way. So after a user adds a source that they want to remix, for example, I want to take my TikTok video and convert it to a LinkedIn post or a Facebook post. I basically want to have drop-down selectors right here so I can select which prompt to use when repurposing that content. Right now, it's just set to use like default prompts in your prompt library, but users can create and edit prompts. So I want them to be able to choose like their own custom prompts here. Let me just clean this up to each selected platform, and the drop-down allows users to select which prompt to use to create post drafts. Okay, then click enter. And now it's going to analyze the remix screen and create a plan for adding prompt selection dropdowns. And one thing you might notice is I didn't actually tag any files. So when I used to use Cursor and Windsurf, I mean, you'd absolutely have to tag which files you wanted to include as context. I typically find that I don't have to do that with Claude Code. Certainly you can do that. So if you type @ you can tag files and stuff, but I just generally find that I don't have to do that. As you start working on the feature, Claude Code is aware of what files you have open. And this is also why I like to clear the context every time I work on something different, because initially Claude will go through this like planning phase, understanding how the current code base works and which files would be relevant to this feature. And that's already in the context for the session. And I know it's really tempting when Claude Code is running to just like leave and come back when it's done. And I definitely do that. But I found my sessions to be much more productive if I force myself to sit here and read what it's doing, follow along, and most importantly, stop it if it looks like it's going down the wrong rabbit hole. Because you could literally save 10 minutes of Claude Code kind of going down the wrong rabbit hole. So I do read what is its plan, what is it doing at each of these steps. And if you've tried any AI coding tool, I mean, they all sound very confident and correct in what they're doing, but in many cases they're absolutely wrong. And so that's why it's important to pay attention to what it's doing, cut it short before you waste a lot of time going down the wrong rabbit hole. Oops, I accidentally clicked escape there. I just click continue. My escape is rebound to my caps lock, so I'll accidentally hit it sometimes. But usually if I say continue, it's fine. And yeah, if you don't have an ergonomic keyboard like Kinesis, or the other one I'm trying out right now is Glove 80, highly recommend. It's amazing. Finally, it's creating its implementation plan. And yeah, it would have gone faster, honestly, if I tagged the right files in context. But I also really like that I don't have to do that most of the time. And it eventually does find like the most relevant files to analyze. Okay, so here's its first draft plan. Almost never proceed with a plan like this. I'll almost always say no, keep planning. Even if I decide to proceed with the plan, I would rather use my shortcut Code, which tells Claude to implement the plan, but make sure, tests pass and run lint checks and all these things. Okay, so let's read its plan, create this new component that fetches and displays users' prompts, search function. Includes search functionality, show prompt title with description on hover. Okay, maybe add default option that uses platform's default. Yeah, that all makes sense. Modify platform state. Okay, add prompt dropdown next to post count. Controls. It's talking about these post counts controls. Okay. Ensure spacing. Sounds pretty good, actually. I'm not sure we really need this one. I'm going to give it feedback. Update the plan as follows. Okay. Everything on same row. Okay, so here, just update the plan. Just remove stuff we don't need. At this phase, I also like to question things like, do we really need that? I'm like mixed on the search functionality. I mean, it'd be nice to have the search functionality right away, but realistically, people don't have hundreds of prompts. They have dozens of prompts. Always click no, keep planning. And then now what I do here is I type qplan. And let's go back to our CLAUDE.md file, right? So remember, qplan tells Claude to analyze similar parts of the code base and determine whether this plan so far is consistent with how I do things in the rest of the code base. It introduces minimal changes and, most importantly, reuse existing code where possible. And so I almost never just like accept the plan and move on. I really encourage you to question it if something doesn't make sense, if you're not sure if it's worth it to include something, if stuff seems unnecessary, just remove it for now. You could add it later, right, if it's critical. Once the plan looks good, I run this shortcut qplan to update it so that it's more consistent with the code base and a quality check for the plan. And then once I'm super happy with the plan, then I'll run Qcode, which is over here, right? These shortcuts are actually in order of how I use them, right? So when I start a new feature, chore, bug fix, I clear the context, then type Qnew. I tell it like the user story, we'll go back and forth a bit. If the plan looks pretty good, then I type Qplan as a quality check, okay? And then when I'm happy with the plan and ready for Claude Code to start coding, I type Qcode, okay? Then after it codes, I want to do a quality check. So this will do a quality check for everything, but I find it more effective to separately check functions first and then separately check tests. Then you'll see towards the end, I'll do QUX to output a list of the things that I should test. And then QGit at the very end to create a commit and push. And I do find qplan is actually really helpful because oftentimes Claude Code will produce a plan, and when you dig into it, it's like, why wouldn't you just do it this way? I have an example example in the code base or something similar in the code base. And QPlan is really good at telling Claude Code, oh, hey, use this pattern that is already in the code base for this new feature. Okay, here's its updated plan. Okay, implementation steps. Okay, so here towards the end, it summarized it. Minimal changes approach. So this reuses the existing combo box pattern. Okay, leverages existing prompt fetching, maintains current UI structure. These two are kind of generic, so not super helpful, but you can see now the plan is a lot more detailed in terms of what it's going to use and most importantly reuse from our existing code base. And again, this is where you want to push back and really question stuff. Like if you don't understand why are you suggesting this, you just ask, right? And then Claude will either justify it or remove it from the plan. I'll say, will any of these changes break existing functionality? I'm just giving you an example of stuff you can ask, right? In fact, this is probably a really good question to add to QPlan, like summarize potentially breaking changes. Okay, and here's its analysis of breaking changes. Of course, AI would say there are no breaking changes if implemented carefully. But again, this is stuff that you really want to think through, question it, make sure you're happy with the answer. And once you're happy with everything, I just type Qcode. And like I said, and you can see over here on the left what that corresponds to. It's really neat because I can just open this CLAUDE.md file and it basically reminds me the process step by step. And while it's making all of these changes, so now it's coding, what I like to do is personally have this source control or work tree open. And then any files that it modifies or creates, I like to literally look at what it's doing. And like I said earlier, this is the point when you're tempted to just let Claude Code do its thing. But it's honestly incredibly important to pay attention to what it's changing because it can introduce all kinds of stuff that impacts or significantly bloats your code base. It could leave things in there that are unused, implements questionable things, and it is really important to pay attention to what it's doing. I like to read the summary of what it's doing on the right-hand side and also open the files that it's changing and kind of follow along. And again, if it's going down a pretty sketchy rabbit hole for some reason, just stop it early, ask it, why are you doing this? And change its approach so it doesn't go down the wrong rabbit hole. And if you prefer this view where you have like the old version and then new version on the right hand side, you can do that as well, obviously in Visual Studio Code. Okay, now it's running prettier and doing the type check, and then it's going to test the implementation. Okay. The other thing I'll point out is that these checklists also serve as reminders for me. Can you read the function and honestly follow what it's doing? That's a great sanity check, like even for us as humans. When I look at this, is it clear what it's doing? Is it clear that it's necessary? Like this to me, slightly questionable. This looks okay so far. Post-draft, multi-form. This little sloppy, like is there a better way that it could have done this, right? And so I also personally like to go just down these checklists. Another handy thing, when you select stuff in this editor, similar to Cursor or Windsurf, Claude Code is aware of it. So let's say I wanted to just improve this or question this. I would just select it like this and tell Claude Code, is there a better way to do this? It looks a little bit sloppy, or is this really necessary? And you can see on the right-hand side when it ran prettier and type checking, a bunch of stuff failed. And so now it has to go fix that. Okay, type checks pass, and now it's just fixing these minor lint errors. And even though Claude is still running, I can go ahead and like start testing it out, right? So here I click Twitter, and then here I clicked Instagram. There is a loading spinner. That's kind of a minor bug, right? It's still stuck. I only have a couple prompts in this sample, but this is pretty cool. The names are kind of confusing here, but in production, users have prompts that are geared towards all kinds of different copywriting styles. So rather than Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, you could have a prompt that's like, write a technical tutorial in this format, or write a micro essay. But this is pretty much exactly what I want, right? So the default will default to the platform default. I also want to test creating a new prompt. My new prompt, write the following content in a 10-point bullet point list. Okay, so here I'm creating a new prompt, and then let's see if I can select it. Yeah, so here, my new prompt. We have to fix that spinner though, and then click generate post. So if this worked, then it should generate basically a 10-point bullet point list. Okay, and there we go. That was our new prompt. You can run qcheck, which will like kind of check everything. So let's do that first. However, I find it generally more effective to separate You run qcheckf to check the functions, and then qcheckt to check the tests. Okay, and you can see it's already reviewing prompt select, and you can see this bullet point list. Here's one thing where it could be improved. Now you'll notice Claude Code and other AI tools like often will say, oh, you should extract this into a separate function. But the reason why I had to add this whole section over here in CLAUDE.md, you should not refactor out a separate function until there's a compelling need, is precisely because it would be a little bit too trigger happy and like moving everything to a separate function. And here you can see like the beauty of implementation best practices and the coding of each item, BP1, BP2, BP3, C1, TDD not followed. Yeah, I noticed that there were like absolutely no tests written. Usually it actually does write tests first. And so that definitely would have been a candidate of me kind of stopping it early and be like, make sure to do TDD first. And then here are its recommendations. I'm going to implement 1, 3, 1, 2, and 4. We don't want to extract it into a separate logic, and also remove the loading spinner. It's removing the loading spinner, and it decided to keep the platform parameter just to display it for default platform prompt. And funny enough, Claude Code is kind of correct here. I don't really have a lot of tests. Most of my tests do focus on functions rather than like complex mocked integration. So that is something I need to improve in my own code base. But for this particular feature, yeah, it's not going to be like a ton of going on. Next, let's run qcheckf. And this will force Claude to look at the code changes that it has introduced and make sure that it follows our best practices checklists. So even though I specify function, like Claude will generally look at all major non-testing code changes that were introduced. And you can see the checklist here. So it's reviewing first the prompt select components. Now it's reviewing post draft multi-post form state management, slight duplication functionality, but it says it's acceptable, so that's why it's in yellow. However, custom prompt fetching has high complexity, difficult to test, could be extracted. So you may have noticed Claude has been suggesting that for a while. But again, I don't really want to do this unless there's a very compelling need. Even Claude agrees that this is not really critical as the current implementation already works. Okay, so I'm still a little sketched out by this though. So I'm going to highlight this and you can see 10 lines selected. Claude Code is aware of what I've highlighted. I'll say this looks a bit messy. Let's see what it does. Okay, and this is much closer to what we originally had, right? Record here, string, and then number. Number actually refers to the count. I can remix my TikTok video into 3 Twitter posts, and then prompt ID is use this prompt for those 3 Twitter posts. So this looks much better. There was something else that was sketchy as well. Yeah, like this looks really sketchy. This is why I like to visualize the working tree version, because I can eyeball this. And is it super clear at a first glance what is going on? If not, then I just highlight this code block and either ask Claude, like, why is this necessary? Or tell Claude to clean it up. And of course, the feature you're implementing and which parts of the code base it touches will definitely influence how extensively Claude Code tests stuff. For this particular feature, it's pretty light on testing, right? Like we're not making major changes. We just are introducing a drop-down selector on the front end so people can choose which prompt will be used. And this also looks a little sketchy. So this looks a bit messy. Okay, so change this whole mess to 1 line, right? This is general best practice. The first shot version of Claude Code will produce working code, right? Like you saw me test it. It was basically working within 10 minutes, right? But in terms of the code quality that was introduced, a lot of room for improvement. And that's why it's important to just pay attention to what it's doing, because all of that stuff piles up over time and you will be left with a massive piece of spaghetti code if you don't pay attention and deliberately clean some of that stuff up. Okay, so we're almost done. I'm just going to change the name of this one to be bullet point. Write the following. Okay, and let's create another prompt. Quotes. Extract the top 3 most controversial quotes for this source. Okay, I just want a couple different prompts so we can test all different kinds of prompts for the platforms. Call this one like blog. Rewrite the following content in a blog post with emojis everywhere. Okay, so now we have 3 custom prompts that we're going to test. Here I ran the QUX command, which in the CLAUDE.md file just means that Claude is imagining it's a user experience tester of the feature we just implemented, output a comprehensive list of testing scenarios sorted by priority. And this is really handy because, towards the end of implementing a feature, I kind of get lazy and don't necessarily think through all the possible edge cases and scenarios. So this is nice to just kind of go down through the list. Now, it is pretty comprehensive. As you go further down the list, you might say, this doesn't really apply, or like this would never happen. What I like to do is have the app open here on the left-hand side, the testing list on the right-hand side, and then just go down the list in priority order. So here, add a source. Okay, we already have TikTok as a source. Select one platform, LinkedIn, choose a prompt, say bullet points, and then generate post. Verify that the generated content follows the custom prompt format, which it does because this is a list of 10 bullet points, and verify that the content is based on the source material, which is correct. Next one is default prompt behavior. Let's just do Facebook. We're just leaving it as default, and then generate post. So this will use default prompt, right? A viral Facebook post or something. Yeah, this looks pretty good. So again, this is really nice to go down the list. The next scenario I would test would be multiple platforms with different prompts, if I don't add any sources, etc., etc. So you just go down the list and test the ones that you believe are relevant. If you're pretty happy with the feature, the very last step is to type qgit, and on the left-hand side you can see this will basically just add all stages to changing, create a commit using the conventional commits format, and then push to your remote branch. This does not create a pull request, so if I want to do that as a last step, I would just say create a pull request. And it's following the format specified. Feat means feature, add prompt selection dropdown. Now it's pushing to GitHub. Okay, and it summarized the changes here. If you want to create a pull request, you can also just tell Claude Code create a pull request. And that's pretty much it, my entire process from start to finish. Where I spend the most time pushing back on the plan, questioning what it's done after it produces its first draft of code, really questioning things that look sloppy. Even when you run these best practices checklists, it's still not going to be perfect. There's still going to be sloppy pieces of code, unnecessary pieces of code. And if code quality is important to you, as it probably should be, if you have like a bunch of users in a complex code base, then you are definitely going to want to stay on top of each change that it's making. But overall, this process is much better than not having any rules or best practices in place. So I found this AI coding rules file to significantly save me a lot of time. It's ordered in such a way that makes it easy for me to follow, right? Like start a new session, plan it out, make sure it's similar to other parts of the code base and reusing existing code, implement the plan using test-driven development, check the quality of your code with these checklists, output a list of things that I need to test as the human UX tester, then commit and push to GitHub. I guarantee that if you follow the step-by-step process, your AI coding experience will be better. Again, you still need to be the senior engineer telling Claude, like, don't go down this rabbit hole, driving everything and architecting it, especially if you have an existing complex code base. But these tips will definitely ensure that you are much more productive AI coding tools. If you like this video, hit like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below. Would love to hear from you.